As someone who has covered NASCAR for the last few years, you meet people along the way who you develop relationships with and appreciate what they do in the sport. For me, one of those people is Jeff Gluck. The athletic motorsports writer is one of the best in the business. I regularly read his work and always enjoy his entertaining 12 questions. I've tried to get him on the channel for a while now, and I'm glad we were able to pull off this interview at this specific time because it comes just 24 hours after he and Jordan Bianchi put out a very informative story on the state of NASCAR's charter negotiations. All right, I'd like to welcome to the channel from The Athletic, Jeff Gluck. Hey, Jeff, appreciate you joining us today.
Yeah, no, I appreciate it. You've asked me a couple times, and I've just been like, well, I think the last time my voice was gone, like
Right.
gone. And then it was one of those things where like I just got over this cough like a couple days ago. So I'm
Right.
glad I didn't have to cancel again because it's one of those spring things, you just can't
Right.
get rid of it. I was like, oh man, what if I have to call Kyle again and be like, man, he's going to think I'm just avoiding him at this point. So here's
No,
my voice is back and now I can come on the show. So thank you for having me.
absolutely. Well, I got to say the timing is pretty good considering what came out in yesterday's athletic. So I had a list of questions that I'd prepared that I wanted to talk to you about, but I feel like with yesterday's article with Jordan that you guys wrote about the charters, we have to talk about that. So let's just take that from the top. You guys put a really thorough piece together talking about the different components of the charter, the history, I mean, the value. I have to ask, one of the most fascinating things that I thought came out of it was when you guys were talking about the next gen car, and you're talking about some of the teams, when talking about the disparity between the top teams and the lower teams, buy more parts than necessary so the team can scan for disparities and they use the best parts for races and then the rest they don't. So that is so fascinating to me. And it obviously shows that all the teams are trying to find any and all possible advantages. So when you learned that, was that surprising to hear, or did you kind of expect that?
I had no idea about that at all. And during the course of the reporting for this, somebody mentioned that, and I was like, what? I couldn't believe that. Right. But
Right.
it kind of makes sense because, if they have these scanner technologies, they can look for little deficiencies in the
Right.
parts. And I was told that, like you said, they'll buy 10 of something, right? And they might use two of them, and the rest maybe they'll sell to a smaller team or they'll just sit on them and never use them. So it's like it's crazy, right? And part of
Right.
that is why NASCAR is like, well, why don't we give you guys a cost cap then? Well, you always say you're spending too much money and spend less money, you need more money. Well, if Jim France especially, I think, believes that whatever money the teams get, they're going to spend. And
Right.
so when they're telling him we want more money, he's like, well, look at the kind of stuff that you guys do. So I think because of that, NASCAR would really like, and I think some of the teams are in favor of the cost cap too. And to just say, all right, like we'll just limit it, so and then you don't need as much money. But of course, a lot, in general, the teams are saying no, because that's just a way for you guys to not have to give us as much money, or and keep that down, keep our share down. So they don't want that, right? But at least for now. But I think that's all part of the negotiation. So we'll see where that goes. But yeah, that I to answer your original question, I had no idea that was going on until this story.
So, you just mentioned the cost cap, and I know in the article you talk about individually some of the teams were okay with that idea and are willing to do something like that, but collectively they wouldn't agree to it. So it really seems to me like this approach that NASCAR and Jim Franson specifically they're taking is we are not going to talk to the RTA, or what is it called, the TNC, the Team Negotiating Committee. We're not
Mm-hmm.
going to talk to them anymore. The February meeting before Daytona, NASCAR didn't show up, but they're now starting to talk to individual teams. So it's kind of like the breakdown, divide and conquer, I guess is the approach. So talk to me a little bit about that, because I find that really interesting, because it is a divide and conquer. You talk to them individually, and these smaller teams and these owners can't say, no, Mr. France, I don't want to meet with you. So they're kind of put in a really awkward position. So talk to me about your reporting on that.
Yeah, you're right. You touched on it there. I think the smaller teams and even the mid-level teams don't feel like they can turn down those meetings. It's like, all right, Jim France is coming to you and saying he wants to meet with you, and you're not Rick Hendrick,
Right.
you're not Joe Gibbs necessarily, and to be like, well, nah, I'm gonna hold strong here, right? Like, so it's been interesting because, I think the teams still prefer for NASCAR to go through this TNC. So there's four people on this committee that we're supposed to negotiate, right? Jeff Gordon from Hendrick, Steve Newmark from Roush Fenway Keselowski, Dave Alpern, who's the president of Joe Gibbs Racing, and Curtis Polk, who's MJ's longtime right hand man and a part owner of 2311 as well.
Right.
So they had originally been the ones negotiating, and after a while, NASCAR said, we're not getting anywhere with this. We're not going to do this. And so they started going team by team to meet with whoever would talk to them. And so, it's interesting because it in some sense feels like those teams who have been in the meetings with France are closer to saying, we don't know what's in it yet, but from what it sounds like, it might be fairly close to what we'd be willing to accept, because they also think he's not going to budge off of permanent charters, so that it's like a lost cause to them. But the TNC still is like, we're still waiting to meet with them. We still haven't heard what you're offering. We can't get our negotiations going. So there's sort of this disconnect and a little bit of a divide, I think, in just based on who's talked to who so far. But still, nobody really knows, because nobody to this point has gotten like a piece of paper that says, here's what we're offering yet.
Right. So it's just so hard for me. And I think I counted like 4 or 5 times in your article where you guys said that NASCAR, the teams, everybody feels like a deal is going to be worked out. So there's this positive, yes, it's going to happen. But for me, it's just like, it's not happened yet. And we're in May now, we have 7 months till the end of the year. That's a lot of time. But what if it doesn't happen? I mean, gameplay with me, just go along. What happens if those teams, the small teams say, yeah, we'll do it, and the big teams say no? I mean, that could get really, really messy quick, right?
Correct. And nobody really has a great answer for that. We asked probably half a dozen people that exact question, and nobody is quite sure, I guess. Excuse me. But
Bless you.
the um the thing is, like, I think the general consensus is that the people that sign the charter agreement would get their charters extended, and the people that don't sign it would just have their charters sort of expire and disappear. And, the thing is, then it's sort of up to them, like, okay, do we want to go to the Clash? Do we want to go to the All-Star race? No, probably not, because we don't have to. And
Right.
then you could even see a situation where it's like, I don't know, let's say, this is theoretical or hypothetical, I guess, but
Sure.
let's say a team is like, yeah, you know what? We're not really in playoff contention or whatever. So, by the time the summer rolls around, or, we don't need to have our driver make every start. So Pocono, we going to go to Pocono? No, we don't need to go there. Michigan, are we going to go? New Hampshire? No. You know what I mean? So like you could start
Right.
to see more of like people pick and choose races in theory. Now, obviously the teams that are trying to make the playoffs and you have to make every start, you
Right.
give that up if you don't show up, right? But,
Sure.
if you don't race and you don't have to race to keep your charter and keep the guaranteed money, maybe you see smaller fields. But see, the thing is, it doesn't seem like that's enough leverage. And so that's why, going back to your original question, about why the optimism is there. I think the optimism is there not because people think a great deal is going to get worked out, but eventually, I think everybody sees the teams are just going to have to do it. Like, what are you going to do if you have a $40 million piece of paper
Right.
and this is the last offer, and you get to December and you're just going to let it go? I mean, I guess you could, but that seems like an awfully interesting financial decision. You know what I mean? So
Right.
I think if the teams don't feel like they have leverage, and where else can they race? Even if, it's like, well, all right, we're not going to do NASCAR. We're going to try to form our own thing. NASCAR, SMI own most of the tracks. So I think the teams are sort of in a position here where they're going to get more money. They're not going to get everything they want. They're not going to get permanent charters, at least from what it sounds like at this point. So that's why I think some of them are like, all right, well, we're getting more than we did, so maybe we can just deal with it. But again, nobody's committing to that because still at this point, as of the start of May, nobody's actually seen what that offer would be.
Right. So, I saw in your article, we talked with Jimmy Johnson and he talks about posturing. So I don't know if you saw today's New York Times article, but Jordan was quoted in there. Did you see that?
I did, yeah. Yep, just came out within the last couple hours. Yep.
Right. So to me, it's like, Denny talked about it yesterday with Dell Jr. on the podcast after you guys wrote the article. Now Jordan's coming out in a New York Times article. So that seems like, hey, let's get a push out there. Let's get some information out. And I mean, come on, when you get the GOAT going out and talking, and he talks about, what I had written down, the sport could die is what he says. And it's not going to be because of competition. So, I mean, when you have Michael Jordan talking about NASCAR in that way, after he's just been, the center of attention a couple of weeks ago at Talladega, and everybody's talking about how great it is. Now he's talking about the sport and the serious financial nature of it. What do you make of Jordan going to the New York Times and talking to it? Is it just posturing? Or, I mean, do you think that his influence, as great as it may be around the world, will actually have an impact in these negotiations? Could he, I mean, Curtis Polk goes on and on about their tenants in an apartment. So do you think that Jordan can make a difference and change this where there could be permanent charters? If he does, like you said in the article, they're supposed to meet with France in the coming weeks or months. So do you think Jordan could make a difference?
I don't know. I mean, it seems like Jim France, from everything we've heard, is a very, very stick to your guns, old school traditionalist. And he's told people, you know, I this isn't how my dad and my brother would have done it. This is not how I'm going to do it. Right. So,
Right.
you know, Michael Jordan saying, hey, this should be this way. I don't know if you can change a stubborn person's opinion like that, who is very set in their ways. Um, Obviously I agree that the owner's putting Jordan out there, who never really does interviews, right? Like
Right.
it's a way to put pressure on NASCAR, but I just don't know if it'll work because ultimately what is NASCAR's motivation to do it? Like, from their view, they view the NBA differently, right? Because the NBA is owned by those 30 teams or whatever, however many there are. And
Right.
same with the NFL, owned by the 32 teams. So the commissioner actually works for those owners. Where here NASCAR is a for-profit business, and if you want to come race, have the ability to do so, and they'll pay you money to come race. But NASCAR is not ready to give pieces of its business away to the competitors. So, and that's never been their model. Could that change someday? Maybe, but it doesn't seem like it's going to change today for this negotiation. And even if you have Michael Jordan out there saying it should, I don't know. It really all comes down to Jim France. I really think it does. I mean, you could talk about, well, there's Ben Kennedy's out there, Steve Phelps, Steve O'Donnell. This is really Jim France's deal.
Yeah, it's a fascinating story, and we'll obviously be covering it over the coming months. Obviously, we hope it works out because it's to the benefit of all of us. So let's move on. One of the questions I originally wanted to ask you was, we're almost 12 races, a third of the way through the season. Just kind of give me your assessment of the season and maybe, a top surprise driver. I know I have a couple that I've written about and talked about on the channel. Just kind of give me your assessment of the first 11 races of 2024.
Well, it's interesting because after 2022, it was a legit question going into last year was like, okay, this was a crazy year, first year next gen. It was random, all these different winners. Is this going to be how next gen is? Or are the top teams going to figure it out and they're going to sort of prevail again? Well, not only have the top teams figured it out, but now it seems like the trend so far this season is they're like sucking all the air out of the room. I mean, it's
Right.
except for the super speedways, it's all Hendrick and Gibbs. And Trey Ryan posted a stat on Twitter where the laps led for non-super speedways this year. It's astounding
Right.
how much Hendrick and Gibbs have led compared to any other team, including Penske even,
Sure.
And so that trend doesn't seem like it's going to go away anytime soon. The bigger teams are only going to, continue to hone their setups, and they have the best pit crews, and they've sort of stockpiled a lot of the brightest minds in some sense. So you might see a breakthrough every now and then. Here's a Trackhouse, here's a 2311, here's a Penske even that jumps up, but it's going to be a Hendrick and Gibbs season, it seems like at this point,
Right.
and everybody else is sort of playing catch up. Now, in terms of surprises, it feels like, I don't think anybody thought Stuart Haas was going to do anything. And
Right.
Chase Briscoe being 12th in points seems very impressive to me. I mean, what were the expectations there after Harvick left? And he's running pretty well to stay up there right now. And then even Noah Gragson, right? Like,
Yeah.
you really didn't expect anything out of him. His average finish is 11 places better than it was last year when he was with Legacy. Um, and he just finished sixth at Dover, and he's had some really good runs. He's only, I think he's like 1 point out of the top 20 or something. So he's not really in playoff range points wise, but if he continues to improve and keep this up, you never know what could happen. So I think those have been some of the pleasant surprises, but again, on the negative side, surprise, it's Ford is in general just off. It seems like Ryan Blaney is the only guy that's, regularly competitive for them. Logano, it's like a lot of times he feels like he's missing, and SHR still isn't what they were without, with Harvick not there. And RFK also has taken a step back, it feels like.
Right.
So, it just seems like if you're not a Hendrick or Gibbs driver right now, you're trying to figure out how you can go and have a chance to win.
Yeah, last week I put together some numbers for the first 2 years and 10 races, so 82 races of the next gen car. And I was shocked to see the numbers. It was 26 wins by Hendrick, 17, and now last weekend with Denny, 18 wins by JGR. So that's 44 of the 82 races. So more than half won by those two organizations. And seeing this year, it's like they're just adding to those totals, and it just doesn't seem it doesn't seem at any point it's going to slow down. Talking about Noah, I'm working on a video currently, and I'm comparing him to other drivers in the field. But I first compared him to Eric Almirola through 11 races last year. And Eric's average finishing position, I think, was 23.1 versus Noah, I think it's 17.3. So Harvick's gone. And so SHR, you expect to have a drop off, but Noah has actually picked up and has performed considerably better in the 10 car. So I think it's interesting. I talked to him at COTA, and he's just full of confidence. I actually heard him talking with you guys yesterday on Sirius XM, and he's full of confidence. And obviously he's a good driver by what he did in the Xfinity series. So, I mean, I wouldn't be surprised. Everybody's talking about Ty Gibbs getting a win. I wouldn't be surprised to see Noah do something. He's finished in the top five, had a couple top fives or a couple top tens in the last couple of weeks. So it seems encouraging for him and Chase. Now, if they can just pick up the rest of the guys at SHR, they might have something cooking over there. But moving on to another topic, and this we'll wrap up after this one, Jeff. And again, I appreciate you joining me. You talked a couple weeks ago at Talladega, and it's something I've said on this channel, the Fox coverage. When it comes to races and cameras being zoomed in, but you had mentioned specifically they went to a commercial break right before the end of the stage. So you've covered this sport a lot longer than I have. I've been at like half, not even half of what you've done. So kind of give me your perspective on television coverage and how it has changed. Because from my perspective, over the last couple of years, it's just been really frustrating, because I was having a conversation with someone the other day at NASCAR, and I said, you know what? There's so much momentum from the full speed and everything. The races are quality. I mean, there's a lot of good stuff going on, but I feel like the TV coverage just doesn't do it justice. And when you're at a track or when you listen to Sirius XM NASCAR radio after race, all the fans that are there talk about what a great race, they enjoyed it. And when you see it on the broadcast and you read Reddit or hear people talking about it on social media, it's like two different worlds, which I think is sometimes reflected in your good race polls. So kind of give me a sense of where you see the television coverage this year and in the past couple years compared to where it was, and how that might have an influence on people's perception of races.
Well, first of all, I think the commercial part of it has always been there, right? Like I
Fair.
can remember writing stories 15 years ago or something about how bad the commercials are and how commercials are taking away so much from it. And even though that's the case, it still never seems to, you never seem to get used to it, right?
Right.
Like I always used to compare it to like it's like you're watching a theater show, like you're watching a play or a musical or something, right?
Right.
And the musical is going and you know it's going. And as the actors are acting on the stage, they suddenly pull the red curtain over and you know it's still going on. It's
Right.
still going right behind the curtain. And they open it back up and you've missed part of the scene. You don't know what happened. And the audience is like, well, what did we just wasn't it just still going? It wasn't
Right.
the intermission, right? That's what it feels like, right? And I believe, if I'm not mistaken, correct me if I'm wrong, I think NASCAR is really the only major professional sport that takes commercials in the middle of live action. I mean, you look at, and obviously other sports have timeouts built in, but like soccer, right? Soccer
Right.
has halftime,
Right.
but they go, 45, 50-minute, depending on extra time halves
Right.
with no breaks, no commercials, no, I mean, and because if you did that, soccer fans would riot.
Yes.
It is unacceptable. They would never put up with that, right?
Right.
And F1 has also figured out a way to go, it's commercial free. So I almost feel like now that you can see, okay, somebody paid huge money for the World Cup, and they don't go to commercials. And somebody's paying a lot of money for F1 and they don't go to commercials. You go, well, how come NASCAR's still stuck with this? Because I really think it is a detriment to the viewing. And, I'd be fine if they said, look, we're not going to go to commercials, but we're going to make the stage breaks 10 minutes long or something, right? Like, and so, yeah, if you're at the track, you got to watch them tool around for some extra laps and whatever. But maybe, hey, maybe that's time you go to the bathroom. Maybe that's time you go get concessions, whatever.
Right.
Because it just, and you could say, oh, you're taking laps away from the race. Okay. Would you rather take a few laps under caution away, or would you rather miss actual green flag laps? Like
Right.
it doesn't seem like there's a lot of common sense, but at the same time, as long as these TV networks continue to pay more and more and more billions and billions, NASCAR can go to them and say, hey, a lot of commercials, huh? And they're going to say, yeah, we just gave you $1 zillion to
Right.
show your, races. So shut up. We're going to sell all the ads we want,
Right.
what can NASCAR say? So I think sort of the fans have been sold down the river in some sense there, where it's just always going to be like this. I'll be interested to see if it changes like with Amazon, since that's, streaming, and will that be different? And you're already paying to have this streaming service, but we know there's streaming services with commercials. So
Yeah.
I don't know. I don't know where it's going to lead.
Well, I mean, I hope that I was thinking about streaming as well and hoping that there is some relief of the bombardment of commercials, because it is just overwhelming. And I have people push back when I talk about it on the channel saying, that's just the way it's always been. Well, I say, well, let's change it, right? And I've seen examples of F1 and they do it. They can do it and it's possible, but again, it's got to be built into the contract. So we'll see where it goes. Hey, Jeff, I really appreciate you taking the time to visit with me and talk about that article. Great job by you and Jordan. I really enjoyed reading it. And I encourage all people who follow my channel to go check it out, because it's really thorough, provides really good depth and background on what's going on with the charter. So again, thanks for joining me on the channel. I appreciate it and hope we can have you back here on the channel here in the next few weeks.
Definitely. No, I appreciate it. And thanks for sticking with me to my voice returned. And hopefully it'll stay strong enough for the next appearance as well. So thank you.
Sounds good. Thanks, buddy. I appreciate it.
All right, man. Thanks. Have a good one. Thanks for working me in.